"Now I'll finally have everything," my daughter-in-law whispered at my son's funeral, and in that moment, surrounded by white lilies and polished oak, I realized I had never truly known the woman standing just a few feet away from me. The chapel was filled with soft murmurs, the kind people use when they think grief should sound a certain way, hushed and respectful, as if sorrow had rules. I stood near the front, my black gloves folded neatly in my hands, staring at the closed casket that held what was left of my only son, Daniel. The air smelled faintly of roses and something chemical, something clean and distant, like a hospital hallway you never quite leave behind. Ashley stood across the room, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling at just the right moments. People moved toward her in a quiet line, offering condolences, touching her arm, telling her how strong she was. She nodded, dabbed her eyes, leaned into their sympathy like it was something she had practiced. I might have believed it, if I hadn't stepped into that side hallway just minutes earlier, searching for a moment to breathe, and heard her voice light, almost amused, nothing like the grief she wore so carefully in public. "Now I'll finally have everything," she said, and there was a pause, followed by a soft laugh that didn't belong in a place like this. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I simply stood there, my hand resting against the cool wall, listening as her friends murmured back, their voices low but not low enough. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough to understand that whatever Ashley had lost today, it wasn't what I had lost. When I stepped back into the chapel, she was already back in position, her face composed into something fragile and tragic. Our eyes met for a brief second, and she gave me a small, sympathetic smile, the kind people give when they think you're the one who's broken. I returned it. Just a slight curve of my lips. Nothing more. The service continued, voices blending together, scripture, memories, carefully chosen words about a life that had ended too soon. I listened, but not really. My mind kept circling back to that sentence, the way she had said it, not with relief exactly, but with certainty, as if something had finally fallen into place. I thought about the last few months, the small changes I had dismissed at the time. The way Daniel's calls had become shorter. The way Ashley had started answering his phone more often, her voice smooth and controlled, always saying he was busy, always promising he would call me back. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he didn't. I had told myself it was just life, just work, just the natural distance that comes when a son builds a life of his own. Now, standing in that room, I wondered how much of that distance had been chosen for him. A man in a dark suit stepped up to the podium, clearing his throat before speaking. I recognized him after a moment, Mr. Collins, Daniel's attorney. He held a folder in his hands, his expression professional, measured, but there was something else there too. Something that didn't quite belong at a funeral. He glanced briefly in Ashley's direction before beginning, and I followed his gaze. She was watching him now, not crying, not even pretending. Just watching. Calm. Focused. Like she was waiting for something. I adjusted my gloves, smoothing the fabric over my fingers, and for the first time since the morning began, the weight in my chest shifted. It didn't disappear. It didn't lessen. It simply changed shape, settling into something colder, something sharper. Grief was still there, deep and immovable. But now, beneath it, something else had begun to surface. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. Quiet, steady clarity. I stood a little straighter, my eyes moving from the casket to Ashley, then to the man with the folder, and I realized that whatever story was being told in this room, it wasn't the whole truth. And I had just heard the part they never meant for me to know. I did not cry when they closed the casket, not because I had no tears left, but because something inside me had gone very still, like the moment before a storm breaks across a quiet lake. People began to move again after the service, chairs shifting, soft footsteps against the carpet, voices rising just enough to signal that the formal part was over. I remained where I was for a few seconds longer, watching as the room transformed from solemn to social, as if grief had an expiration time everyone else understood but me. Ashley was at the center of it all, surrounded by a small circle of women who leaned in close, their expressions carefully arranged between sympathy and curiosity. She held a tissue in one hand, though her eyes were dry now, and every so often she would press it lightly to the corner of her eye, as if remembering she was supposed to be mourning. I walked toward the back of the room slowly, my steps measured, my hands still folded neatly in front of me. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was all right. That, more than anything, felt like confirmation that the roles had already been assigned. She was the grieving widow. I was simply the mother who had outlived her place in the story. Near the hallway, I paused again, not out of hesitation, but because I heard my name. It was not spoken with warmth. It was spoken with calculation. I did not turn immediately. Instead, I adjusted my glove, smoothing a crease that did not exist, and listened. "She will not last long in that house alone," one of Ashley's friends said quietly, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch it. Ashley let out a soft breath that could have been mistaken for sadness if you did not know better. "She will not have to," she replied. Daniel made sure everything was taken care of before. She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. The implication settled into the air between them, heavy and deliberate. I felt something shift again inside me, not breaking this time, but aligning, like pieces of a puzzle finally turning in the right direction. I stepped into the hallway then, my presence announced by the faint sound of my shoes against the polished floor. Their conversation stopped immediately. Ashley turned, her expression resetting so quickly it would have been impressive under different circumstances. "Margaret," she said softly, stepping toward me, her voice wrapped in concern. "You should sit down. You look tired." I met her eyes, searching for something real, something unguarded, but all I found was a reflection of exactly what she wanted me to see. I gave a small nod. "I am all right," I said, my voice steady, even to my own surprise. She reached out as if to touch my arm, then hesitated, letting her hand fall back to her side. "Daniel wanted you to be taken care of," she added, her tone gentle, almost reassuring. I held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, letting the silence stretch just enough to make her shift slightly on her feet. "I am sure he did," I replied. And for the first time, I realized that whatever Daniel had wanted, whatever he had planned, it might not be what she was counting on at all. Behind her, through the open doors, I could see Mr. Collins again, speaking quietly with another man, the folder still in his hands. He looked up briefly, our eyes meeting across the room, and there was that same expression again, measured, but not neutral. It was the look of someone holding information that did not belong in the open. I inclined my head slightly, a gesture so small it could have been overlooked, but he seemed to understand it. He gave the faintest nod in return. I turned back to Ashley, offering the same polite smile I had worn all morning. "There are a few people I should thank for coming," I said. She stepped aside immediately, gracious, composed, every inch the perfect widow. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." I walked past her without another word, my posture straight, my pace unhurried. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could feel her watching me, measuring me, just as I had begun to measure her. And somewhere beneath the quiet weight of loss, beneath the layers of ceremony and performance, a new understanding settled in. This was not just a funeral. It was the beginning of something else entirely. I moved through the reception room with the same quiet composure I had practiced for years, offering small nods, brief words of thanks, and polite acknowledgments to people whose names I barely registered in that moment, because my attention was no longer on their condolences but on the subtle shifts unfolding around me. Every gesture, every glance, every carefully timed silence seemed to carry a second meaning now, and I found myself watching more than speaking, listening more than responding. A woman in a navy coat reached for my hand and told me Daniel had been a good man, and I thanked her, but even as I spoke, my eyes drifted past her shoulder to where Ashley stood again, this time beside Mr. Collins. She was leaning slightly toward him, her voice low, her expression composed but intent, as if she was asking something she expected an immediate answer to. Mr. Collins did not respond right away. He held the folder close to his chest, his posture firm, his face neutral in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural. Ashley smiled then, a small, controlled smile, the kind that suggested patience rather than warmth. I excused myself from the conversation in front of me and took a few steps closer, not enough to intrude, just enough to observe. I did not need to hear their words this time. The exchange itself was enough. Ashley's fingers tapped lightly against her arm, a subtle sign of tension she would not show anyone else. Mr. Collins finally said something, and whatever it was, it caused her smile to falter for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, nodding as if she agreed. That brief crack was all I needed. I turned away before either of them could notice me watching, my heart steady, my breathing even. The room felt different now, no longer just a place of mourning but a stage where everyone was playing a role, some more convincingly than others. I found a seat near the window, the light filtering in softly through sheer curtains, and sat down for the first time since the service had ended. From there, I could see almost everything without being seen myself. Ashley moved through the room with practiced grace, greeting guests, accepting embraces, thanking people for coming, her voice gentle, her posture perfect. But there were moments, small and fleeting, when she thought no one was looking. In those moments, her expression changed. The softness disappeared. The grief faded. What remained was something sharper, more focused, like a person tracking progress rather than processing loss. I folded my hands in my lap and let my gaze rest on the floor, not because I needed to hide my expression, but because I needed to think. Daniel's last months replayed in fragments, conversations cut short, visits postponed, details I had dismissed at the time now rising with new clarity. There had been a day, just a few weeks ago, when he had called me in the late afternoon, his voice quieter than usual, as if he was choosing his words carefully. He had asked if I was home, if I could talk, and I had said yes, of course, always yes. But before he could say more, the line had gone silent. When I called back, Ashley answered. She told me he had stepped out, that he would call me later. He never did. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Now, sitting in that room, I understood it had been something. Something interrupted. Something unfinished. I lifted my head slightly and looked across the room again. Mr. Collins was no longer speaking with Ashley. Instead, he stood near the exit, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. He did not smile. He did not gesture. He simply held my gaze for a moment, then inclined his head toward the hallway beyond the reception area. It was not an invitation anyone else would notice. But I noticed. I stood up slowly, smoothing my coat, and began to walk in that direction, my steps quiet, my expression unchanged. As I passed Ashley, she turned toward me again, her smile returning instantly, her voice soft. "Are you leaving already?" she asked. I paused just long enough to meet her eyes. "Not yet," I said. And then I continued walking, because for the first time that day, I was not following the flow of the room. I was following something else entirely. I stepped into the hallway where the noise from the reception softened into a distant murmur, the kind that fades into the background when something more important demands your attention. The air felt cooler there, quieter, almost detached from the performance still unfolding behind me. Mr. Collins was already waiting near a side door, his posture straight, the folder still held firmly in his hands as if it carried more weight than paper should. He did not speak immediately when I approached. Instead, he studied me for a moment, as though confirming something. He had already begun to suspect. I stopped a few feet away, leaving just enough space to keep the interaction private but not secretive. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said finally, his voice low and measured, "I was hoping we might have a moment." I gave a small nod. "So was I replied, my tone calm, steady, as if this were any ordinary conversation on any ordinary day. He glanced briefly toward the reception room, then back at me, making a quiet decision before gesturing toward the door beside him. We stepped into a smaller room, one with a single table, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto an empty stretch of parking lot. The sunlight was pale, filtered through thin clouds, casting a muted glow across the space. He closed the door gently behind us, not with secrecy, but with intention. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I removed my gloves slowly, placing them on the table, smoothing them flat with deliberate care. It gave me time. It gave him space to begin. "Your son came to see me 10 days before he passed," Mr. Collins said at last, his eyes fixed on mine, watching closely for any reaction. I did not give him one. Not outwardly. Inside, something tightened, then steadied. "He wanted to review his documents," he continued. "His will, his accounts, his insurance policies. He seemed concerned. The word lingered between us, understated but heavy. I rested my hands lightly on the back of the chair in front of me, not sitting yet, grounding myself in the quiet of the room. Concerned about what? I asked. Mr. Collins hesitated, just for a second, then opened the folder, revealing a set of neatly organized papers. He did not slide them toward me immediately. Instead, he spoke first. He believed there were changes being made that he did not fully authorize, he said. Or at the very least, changes he did not fully understand. I felt the pieces shift again, more clearly now, each one finding its place with a precision that left little room for doubt. Did he make any corrections? I asked. My voice did not rise. It did not falter. It simply moved forward. Mr. Collins gave a slight nod. He intended to, he said. We began the process. But he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The silence carried the rest. I lowered myself into the chair then, finally sitting, my hands resting in my lap, my posture composed. But he did not have time, I said quietly. Mr. Collins met my gaze again, and this time there was no neutrality in his expression. Only certainty. There is more, he added, placing one document on the table, turning it slightly so it faced me but not pushing it closer. A policy adjustment was filed shortly before his death. The beneficiary designation was specific. I did not reach for the paper yet. I did not need to see the name to know who it would be. Instead, I looked at Mr. Collins, holding his gaze with the same calm I had carried all day. And you believe he was aware of this? I asked. Mr. Collins's answer was immediate. No, he said. The word settled into the room with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. I let out a slow breath, not of relief, not of grief, but of understanding. Everything I had heard, everything I had seen, every small detail that had felt out of place now aligned into something unmistakable. I reached forward then, finally, and placed my hand lightly on the edge of the document without lifting it. What happens next? I asked. Mr. Collins did not hesitate this time. That depends, he said, on what you choose to do with what you now know. I sat there for a moment, my hand still resting on the paper, my thoughts no longer scattered but focused, deliberate. When I looked up at him again, there was no confusion left, no uncertainty. Only direction. Then I suppose, I said softly, it is time I start paying closer attention. I did not take the document with me when I left that room, not because I did not understand its importance, but because I understood something else more clearly in that moment, something about timing, about patience, about letting a story reveal itself before trying to rewrite it. I placed my gloves back on carefully, smoothing each finger into place as I stepped out into the hallway again, the distant murmur of voices returning to meet me like a curtain being lifted. Nothing had changed out there. Not on the surface. Ashley was still moving through the room with that same quiet control, her posture perfect, her voice soft, her grief measured in just the right amounts. But I had changed. And that made everything look different. I walked back into the reception slowly, my eyes adjusting not to the light, but to the details I had missed before. The way Ashley positioned herself near the center of every conversation. The way people deferred to her without question, as if she had already assumed a role no one had formally given her. I watched as she spoke with a couple I recognized from Daniel's work, her tone confident now, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain. She was not just receiving sympathy. She was managing perception. I moved toward a table near the back where a few framed photographs had been arranged, images from different years, different versions of my son's life. I picked one up gently, a picture of Daniel standing in front of our old house, his arm around me, both of us smiling into the late afternoon sun. He had been younger then, not just in years, but in presence, in openness. That version of him had not been guarded. That version had not been interrupted. I set the frame back down exactly where I had found it and turned slightly, just enough to catch Ashley's reflection in the glass. She was watching me now. Not openly. Not directly. But watching. Measuring. The same way I had begun to measure her. Our eyes met through the reflection for just a second before she looked away, her expression shifting instantly as someone approached her again. I let the moment pass without acknowledging it, because there was no need to rush anything. Not yet. A man I barely knew stepped beside me and said something about how difficult this must be, how strong I seemed. I nodded, offering a quiet thank you, but my attention was already moving elsewhere. Patterns were forming. Small ones. Subtle ones. Ashley kept returning to the same group of people, the same quiet conversations, always lowering her voice just enough to suggest privacy but not enough to escape notice entirely. Each time, her posture relaxed a little more, her gestures becoming less restrained, as if she believed the most important part of the day was already behind her. I moved away from the table and walked toward the refreshment area, not because I wanted anything, but because it gave me a different angle, a different view. From there, I could see Mr. Collins again, now speaking with another man I did not recognize, his expression still composed, still careful. He glanced toward me once, briefly, then returned to his conversation. That was enough. I understood what he was doing. Giving me space. Letting me observe. Letting me decide. I reached for a glass of water and held it lightly, not drinking, just grounding myself in the simple motion. Across the room, Ashley laughed softly at something one of her friends said, the sound quick, almost reflexive, before she caught herself and lowered her gaze again, returning to the role she had perfected. But I had already heard the version of her that did not belong to this room. And once you hear something like that, you cannot unhear it. You cannot pretend it did not exist. I set the glass back down untouched and straightened slightly, my shoulders settling into a posture that felt less like endurance and more like intention. I was no longer just attending a service. I was no longer just observing a performance. I was beginning to understand the structure behind it, the choices, the timing, the careful placement of every word and every silence. And as I stood there, surrounded by people who believed they were witnessing the end of something, I realized they were wrong. This was not an ending. It was a transition. And I was no longer standing still within it. I was moving, quietly, deliberately, toward whatever came next. The room began to thin as the afternoon moved forward, the steady flow of condolences slowing into smaller clusters of quiet conversations and lingering goodbyes, and with each person who stepped out through the doors, the atmosphere shifted further away from ceremony and closer to something less guarded, less controlled. I remained near the back, still, observant, allowing the space to reveal itself without interruption. Ashley seemed to sense the change as well. Her movements became more efficient, less theatrical. As if she no longer needed to perform for a full audience. She spoke more directly now, her tone lower, her posture less restrained, and I noticed how often she glanced toward the exit, as though measuring how much longer she needed to maintain the illusion. I took a slow step forward, then another, not toward her, but along the edge of the room, keeping distance while adjusting perspective. It was easier to see patterns when you did not stand at the center of them. Near one of the smaller tables, two men stood speaking quietly, their voices barely above a murmur, but one name caught my attention immediately. Daniel. I paused just within earshot, my gaze resting on a nearby photograph so that my presence would not draw notice. He was not himself those last couple of weeks, one of them said, his voice thoughtful, not accusatory. Something was off. He kept double-checking things, asking questions about accounts that should have been straightforward. The other man nodded. I noticed that too. He asked me about a transfer that had already gone through. Said he did not remember approving it. The first man exhaled slowly. Maybe it was just stress. Or maybe, he did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. I stepped away before the conversation could deepen, carrying their words with me like another piece of a puzzle that was no longer scattered. Everything pointed in the same direction now. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just consistently. I moved toward the window again, letting the light fall across my hands, still covered in black fabric, still composed, still steady. Across the room, Ashley was speaking with one of her friends again, her voice low, her expression focused. This time, I did not need to be close to understand the shift. It was in the way she stood, the way her shoulders squared slightly, the way her gestures became more precise, more intentional. She was no longer reacting to the day. She was preparing for what came after it. Mr. Collins stepped into view again, this time closer to the center of the room, his presence subtle but grounded. He was not engaging in long conversations. He was observing, just as I was, though from a different position, a different role. Our eyes met once more, and this time there was no question in the exchange. Only acknowledgement. I turned away first, not out of hesitation, but because I had seen enough for now. I understood the rhythm of the room. I understood the direction of the story being quietly constructed around me. And more importantly, I understood that it was incomplete. I walked slowly toward the coat area, my steps unhurried, my expression unchanged, as if I was simply preparing to leave like everyone else eventually would. Ashley noticed me before I reached the door. She always did. "Margaret," she called softly, moving toward me with that same carefully measured concern. "Do you need anything before you go?" I turned to face her, meeting her eyes fully this time, not through reflections, not from across the room. Up close, the details were clearer. The precision. The control. The absence of anything that could not be managed. I gave a small, polite smile. "No," I said gently. "I have everything I need." The words lingered between us, simple on the surface, but carrying a weight she could not yet see. She nodded, accepting the answer without question, because there was no reason for her to question it. "Not yet." I picked up my coat, draping it over my arm instead of putting it on, and turned toward the exit. The door opened easily, the cool air from outside brushing lightly against my face as I stepped forward. I did not look back. I did not need to. The room, the people, the carefully arranged version of events unfolding behind me were no longer where my attention belonged. What mattered now was what came next, what would be uncovered, what would be revealed when the performance ended and only truth remained. And as I walked out into the quiet of the parking lot, the sky stretching wide and pale above me, I understood something with complete clarity. This was no longer about what I had lost. It was about what had been taken. And that was something I intended to understand fully. I did not drive home right away. Instead, I sat in my car for a moment, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, my coat still folded beside me, untouched. The parking lot was nearly empty now, the quiet stretching out in a way that felt almost unnatural after the controlled noise of the afternoon. I looked straight ahead, not at anything in particular, just allowing the stillness to settle around me. For the first time since the service began, there were no voices to filter, no expressions to read, no movements to track. Just silence. And in that silence, the fragments of the day began to align with something older, something I had not fully allowed myself to examine until now. I started the engine, but I did not move the car. Instead, my mind drifted back to the early days, to the first time Daniel had introduced Ashley to me. She had been poised even then, her smile measured, her words carefully chosen, each sentence landing exactly where it needed to. I had noticed it at the time, not as a warning, but as a difference. Daniel had been open, spontaneous, easy in his presence. Ashley had been precise, controlled. I told myself that opposites balanced each other, that she brought structure to his warmth, that it was a good thing. I had believed that. Completely. I shifted slightly in my seat, my gaze lowering for a moment to my hands, still gloved, still composed. There had been other moments too. Small ones. Easy to dismiss. A dinner where Ashley answered questions directed at Daniel before he could speak. A holiday where plans changed at the last minute, always with a reasonable explanation, always with just enough logic to make questioning it feel unnecessary. A phone call that ended too quickly. A visit postponed. A decision already made before I was even aware it existed. None of it had felt like control at the time. It had felt like life moving forward. Now, sitting there in the quiet, I saw the pattern more clearly. Not forced. Not aggressive. Just consistent. I finally put the car into drive and pulled out of the parking lot slowly, the tires moving over the pavement with a soft, steady sound. The road ahead was familiar, one I had driven countless times, but it felt different now, as if I was seeing it from a slightly altered angle. The house came into view after a few minutes, the same house Daniel had grown up in. The same place that held decades of memories layered one over another. I parked in the driveway and turned off the engine, the silence returning once again, this time more contained, more personal. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, my steps measured, my movements unhurried. Inside, the house felt exactly as it had that morning. Quiet. Ordered. Still. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I set my coat down carefully on the chair by the door and moved into the living room, my eyes moving over familiar objects, photographs, books, small details that had once been part of a life shared, now part of something else entirely. I paused near the desk where Daniel had once sat during his visits, the surface clear, almost too clear. I opened the drawer slowly, not searching for anything specific, just following a thought that had begun to take shape. Inside, there were only a few items. A pen. A notepad. And beneath them, an envelope I did not recognize. It was unsealed. Plain. Unmarked. I lifted it gently, my fingers steady, and slid the paper inside out just enough to see the edge of what it contained. It was not a letter. It was a document. A copy. The header was partially visible, but I did not need to read the entire page to understand its significance. It matched what Mr. Collins had described. A policy adjustment. Filed recently. I placed the paper back into the envelope without removing it fully and set it down exactly where I had found it. There was no rush. Not anymore. I closed the drawer slowly and stood there for a moment, my hand resting lightly against the wood. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a place where something had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be seen. I straightened slightly, my posture settling into something more deliberate, more certain. The day had taken something from me. That much was undeniable. But it had also given me something in return. Not answers. Not yet. But direction. And as I turned away from the desk and moved further into the house, I understood that whatever came next would not be shaped by chance or assumption. It would be shaped by attention. Careful. Quiet. Unyielding attention. That evening, I did not turn on the television, and I did not reach for the phone. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, as if each step required consideration, as if the silence itself was something that needed to be respected. The envelope I had found remained where I left it, untouched in the drawer, not because I was avoiding it, but because I understood that what mattered now was not urgency, but sequence. I walked into the kitchen and filled a glass of water, setting it down on the counter without drinking it, my attention already shifting elsewhere. The house held its usual order, everything in place, everything familiar, and yet there was a new awareness beneath it all, like a second layer that had always existed but had only now come into focus. I returned to the living room and sat down for the first time since I arrived, my hands resting lightly in my lap, my posture straight, my breathing even. My mind did not race. It moved steadily, connecting moments, revisiting conversations, aligning details that no longer felt separate. Ashley's voice echoed again, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. Now I will finally have everything. It had not been said with hesitation. It had not been said with uncertainty. It had been said with expectation. That was what stayed with me. Expectation does not come from hope. It comes from belief. And belief comes from something more solid than assumption. I leaned back slightly, my eyes drifting toward the hallway where Daniel used to walk when he visited, his footsteps familiar, his presence easy. There had been a time when he would arrive without calling, letting himself in with a quiet knock and a smile that never felt rehearsed. That version of him had not been calculating. That version had trusted easily. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to escape the memory, but to hold it steady, to separate it from everything that had followed. When I opened them again, the room looked the same, but my focus had sharpened. I stood up and walked back toward the desk, this time with intention. I opened the drawer again, my movements slow, precise, and took out the envelope once more. I removed the document fully now, laying it flat on the surface in front of me. The paper was crisp, recently printed, the details clear. A life insurance policy adjustment. Filed 10 days before Daniel passed. The beneficiary listed in bold, unmistakable letters. Ashley Whitmore. I read the line once. Then again. Not because I did not understand it, but because repetition has a way of removing doubt. There were signatures at the bottom. Daniel's name. A date. And just beneath it, a second line indicating authorization processing. I studied the signature carefully, my eyes tracing the curve of each letter, the pressure of the pen, the slight inconsistency that might have been nothing, or might have been everything. I had seen his handwriting for decades. I knew its rhythm, its natural flow. This felt close, but not exact. I did not rush to any conclusion. I simply observed. I placed the document back into the envelope and returned it to the drawer, closing it with the same care I had used before. Then I stepped back, my hands resting lightly at my sides, my thoughts settling into something firm. This was no longer a question of grief. It was no longer about loss in the way I had understood it that morning. It was about clarity, about intention, about a sequence of actions that had led to this exact point. I turned toward the window, the sky outside now darker, the last light of the day fading into a quiet blue-gray. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, its sound brief, then gone. The world outside continued as it always had. But inside, something had shifted completely. I was no longer waiting for answers to come to me. I was preparing to find them myself. And for the first time since the day began, I allowed a single thought to settle fully, without resistance. Whatever Ashley believed she had secured, whatever she believed was already hers, she had made one critical mistake. She had said it out loud. And I had heard her. The house remained quiet long after the sun had disappeared, the darkness settling in slowly, almost respectfully, as if it understood that something within these walls had shifted in a way that could not be undone. I did not turn on any lights except the small lamp beside the chair, its soft glow creating just enough clarity without disturbing the stillness I had come to rely on. I sat there for a while, not moving, not reaching for anything, just allowing the weight of what I now knew to settle into something stable, something usable. Grief had not left me. It was still there, deep and constant. But it no longer blurred my thoughts. It no longer softened the edges of what I was beginning to see. I stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway, my steps quiet against the floor, the familiar path now carrying a different purpose. Daniel's room remained exactly as it had been during his last visit, untouched, preserved in a way that once felt comforting but now felt incomplete. I stepped inside and paused, my eyes adjusting to the dim light from the hallway behind me. The air carried a faint trace of something familiar, something that belonged to him, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel it fully. Then I moved forward. The desk in the corner drew my attention first, not because it looked different, but because I now understood that ordinary places often held what others assumed would never be questioned. I opened the top drawer carefully, the motion slow, deliberate. Inside were a few scattered items, nothing remarkable at first glance. A notebook. A receipt. A set of keys I did not recognize. I picked up the notebook and flipped through it gently, page by page, my eyes scanning without urgency. Most of it was empty. But near the middle, there were a few lines written in Daniel's handwriting, quick, slightly uneven, as if written in a moment that did not allow for careful thought. Names. Numbers. Short phrases that did not explain themselves but did not need to. I did not try to interpret them immediately. I simply noted them, letting them settle alongside everything else. I closed the notebook and placed it back exactly where I had found it. Then I looked at the keys again. They were newer than the others I had seen in the house, their edges clean, their surface barely worn. Not something that had been used for years. Something recent. Something added. I held them. For a moment, feeling their weight, their quiet presence, before setting them down again. There was no need to rush. Not now. I stepped back from the desk and let my gaze move slowly across the room, taking in each detail, each object, each small piece of a life that had ended too soon but not without leaving traces behind. Traces that had not been erased. Just overlooked. I turned toward the doorway and stepped back into the hallway, the light from the lamp in the living room guiding my way. As I walked, one thought remained steady, clear, unshaken. Ashley believed the story was already written. She believed the outcome was already secured. She believed that whatever had been set in motion would carry through without interruption. I paused near the living room, my hand resting lightly against the wall, my posture still, composed. She had been careful. Very careful. But not careful enough. Because control relies on silence. On the assumption that no one is listening, no one is watching, no one is paying close enough attention to notice the details that do not quite fit. I had been silent. I had been trusting. But I was no longer either of those things in the same way. I walked back to the chair and sat down again, the lamp casting a soft circle of light around me, the rest of the house fading into shadow. My hands rested calmly in my lap, my breathing slow, even. There was no urgency in what came next. No need for confrontation. No need for immediate answers. Because what I had now was something far more valuable than either of those things. I had awareness. And awareness, when held quietly and used with patience, has a way of revealing everything that was meant to stay hidden. I leaned back slightly, my eyes steady, my thoughts no longer scattered but aligned with a single, undeniable direction. Tomorrow, I would begin. Not with questions. Not with accusations. But with observation. With presence. With a calm that would allow everything to unfold exactly as it needed to. And when it did, when every piece finally settled into place, I would not need to raise my voice or demand the truth. I would already have it.